I cannot believe you still drive that thing. Someone laughed as I pulled into the office parking lot, my old sedan wheezing in protest, its faded blue paint chipped from years of wear. Yet somehow it had been my loyal companion through countless daily routines, early morning commutes, and the occasional road trip that reminded me of the freedom I still longed for. My coworkers chuckled, pointing out the scratches and dents as if these superficial flaws defined my character, but inside, I felt a surge of determination rather than shame, realizing that my life was far more than the car I drove, and that even this modest vehicle had carried me through challenges others could not comprehend, from juggling bills and maintaining a steady job to taking care of responsibilities that often went unnoticed, all while holding on to a dream that seemed almost impossible to achieve. As I stepped out, I adjusted my simple work jacket, mentally preparing for the day ahead, knowing that the laughter of others would not deter me, that each step I took toward my goals mattered more than any opinion, and that the story of my perseverance was only beginning to unfold, with the promise that one day, the people who mocked me might see the strength, vision, and resolve that had carried me through years of quiet determination, and that what they considered a weakness, my old car, was actually a symbol of endurance, humility, and the foundation on which I would build a future far beyond their expectations, a future that would redefine not just how they saw me, but how I saw myself and the value of persistence, planning, and staying true to one's ambitions regardless of external judgment, because success is often born in places overlooked, in moments dismissed, and in humble beginnings that demand creativity, patience, and resilience. Standing there in the cool morning air, surrounded by the subtle hum of other cars and the chatter of people already at their desks, I allowed myself a small smile, understanding that the journey ahead was mine to navigate, that each small choice and thoughtful step would accumulate into significant progress, and that this seemingly ordinary day might very well mark the first chapter in a story where determination, clever strategy, and the ability to see opportunity where others saw only old metal would converge to change the course of my life, revealing not only the potential within me, but the power of quiet perseverance to turn ridicule into motivation and ambition into tangible achievement, setting the stage for a remarkable reversal that would surprise, inspire, and ultimately redefine the meaning of success in the eyes of those who had doubted me. The laughter in the parking lot followed me into the building longer than I wanted to admit, not because the joke was clever, but because everyone understood what it was really about. It was not just the old sedan. It was the life they thought the sedan represented. A man barely getting by. A man with no ambition. A man who had accepted less and called it peace. I worked at a regional insurance office in Columbus, Ohio, where people measured success by leased cars, polished shoes, and how loudly they could talk about weekend plans. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 44 years old, and that faded blue sedan had been paid off for 9 years, which made it more valuable to me than half the luxury cars in that parking lot with monthly payments bigger than my mortgage. Still, logic does not protect pride when people are laughing. I heard Sarah Whitfield's voice before I reached the glass doors. She was the finance manager at Whitfield Auto Group, the dealership her family owned on the north side of town, and she had come by our office that morning to finalize a fleet insurance package. Sarah was polished in the way dealership people often are, all bright confidence, perfect blazer, and a smile that could make a bad loan sound like a favor. She stood near the entrance with 2 coworkers, looking back at my car as if it had personally offended her. "Daniel," she said, loud enough for the others to hear, "if you ever want to know what a real car feels like, come see me. I might be able to get you into something from this decade." The 2 men beside her laughed. I gave a small smile, because that is what men like me learn to do when we need the day to keep moving. "It starts every morning," I said. "That is more than some people can say about their payments." One of the men stopped laughing, but Sarah did not. She tilted her head, studying me like a trade-in appraisal. "Some cars are old because they have character," she said. "Others are old because their owners never figured out how to move up." That one landed. I felt it in the center of my chest, quiet and exact. Not because she knew me, but because she thought she did. She saw the dented bumper, the faded paint, the cracked radio button, and built a whole story around it. What she did not see was the folder in my desk drawer with dealership financial statements I had been reviewing for 3 months. She did not see the calls I had taken with a retired dealer named Frank Callahan, who had taught me how floor plan financing worked, how service departments kept weak sales months alive, how bad inventory decisions could drain a dealership faster than people realized. She did not know I had spent my evenings studying auction reports, used vehicle margins, lender relationships, warranty reserves, parts revenue, and the quiet problems sitting underneath Whitfield Auto Group's shiny showroom. Sarah's family dealership looked successful from the highway, with flags snapping over rows of trucks and a bright sign glowing after dark, but the numbers told a different story. New car allocation was down. Used inventory was aging. Service reviews had slipped. Their floor plan interest had doubled. And the old man who founded it, Sarah's father, had been looking for a discreet buyer before the bank started asking louder questions. I had not planned to make it personal. At first, it was just a business opportunity, one that fit everything I understood: overlooked assets, bad management, loyal employees, and a brand that could be fixed if someone stopped treating image like strategy. But standing there while Sarah smiled at my car like it proved I was beneath her, something inside me shifted. I did not need revenge. Revenge is loud and usually expensive. I needed control. I walked past her into the lobby, set my lunch bag on the counter, and went to my desk without another word. The office smelled like coffee, printer paper, and rain from people's jackets. My coworkers returned to their calls, and Sarah went into the conference room to discuss policy terms, still laughing softly with her people. I sat down, opened my email, and pulled up the message Frank had sent the night before. Whitfield seller packet updated. Owner motivated. Bank pressure increasing. I stared at those words while my old sedan sat outside under gray Ohio clouds, looking exactly like the kind of car people thought belonged to a man with no leverage. Then I picked up the phone, called Frank, and kept my voice low. Send the full package, I said, and find out how fast they can close if the buyer pays cash for the real estate and assumes the operating debt separately. Frank paused. Daniel, are you sure? I looked through the window at Sarah's reflection in the conference room glass, confident, amused, completely unaware that the man she had mocked was already reading the balance sheet beneath her family name. Yes, I said. If they think I cannot move up, I might as well buy the place they used to measure it. I spent the morning in quiet planning, sitting at my kitchen table with the blinds drawn, sunlight slanting across spreadsheets and notepads filled with calculations, as the reality of what I was about to do began to settle in. The old sedan sat in the driveway, a faithful companion, but my mind was miles away, thinking about Whitfield Auto Group and the opportunity that had revealed itself like a secret waiting to be claimed. Sarah Whitfield had returned to her office that morning, unaware of the research I had conducted, the calls I had made, the connections I had cultivated. Every figure I had examined, every inventory report, every service log was a piece of the puzzle that she and her team had overlooked in their rush to project confidence. I knew the employees, the loyal ones who had been with the dealership for decades, understood the tensions, the missed targets, the pressure from the lenders, and their quiet conversations at the water cooler had hinted at the cracks beneath the surface. I had memorized the layout of the showroom, the placement of vehicles, the flow of foot traffic, even the way the afternoon sun would hit the service bay, and I imagined myself walking those floors not as a visitor, but as the one who would guide the future of the dealership. My phone rang, startling me from my concentration, and it was Frank Callahan, confirming details about the owner's willingness to consider an unconventional buyer. I listened carefully, noting the urgency and the discretion he emphasized, and I realized that timing was everything. If I waited too long, someone else might act, but moving too quickly could tip my hand. I needed patience and precision, balancing the element of surprise with the certainty of action. As I reviewed the financial statements again, comparing projected revenues to current obligations, I mapped out potential challenges, contingencies, and the steps needed to secure the acquisition. I also considered the human side, the reactions of the staff, Sarah's likely disbelief, the subtle shifts in client confidence once the change became public. My strategy was not just to purchase, but to demonstrate capability, to show that someone who had been underestimated could understand, manage, and grow what had been written off as stable and successful only in perception. By mid-afternoon, I had drafted emails, scheduled follow-up calls, and outlined the initial conversations I would have with key personnel, all while the sedan gleamed quietly outside, a symbol of endurance and underestimated value. I felt a mix of excitement and focus, knowing that every decision from this point forward would ripple outward, shaping how Sarah perceived me, how the employees adapted, and ultimately, how the story would unfold from a quiet challenge to a decisive move, marking the beginning of a chapter where control, foresight, and unacknowledged potential could turn perceived failure into tangible achievement. And as I packed up my notes to head to the office, I felt a calm determination settle in, ready to act with the confidence of someone who had prepared meticulously, understood the landscape, and knew exactly what had to be done. By the time I returned to the insurance office that afternoon, the parking lot had dried under a pale Ohio sun, and my old sedan sat near the back row with its faded blue paint looking even duller beside the polished SUVs and lifted trucks my coworkers loved to admire. I parked in the same spot, turned off the engine, and sat for one extra breath with Frank Callahan's latest message open on my phone. Owner will meet discreetly. Seller wants real estate separated from operations. Bank wants movement before quarter end. It was exactly the opening I needed, but openings are dangerous when pride is involved. Move too fast, and people see you coming. Move too slowly, and someone else walks through the door you found. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket and headed inside, carrying my lunch bag like any other ordinary employee returning from an ordinary break. That was the part Sarah Whitfield never understood about men like me. Ordinary can be camouflage. In the conference room, her fleet insurance meeting was still going, and through the glass wall I could see her standing beside a projected spreadsheet, one hand resting on the table, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed numbers existed to support her opinion, not challenge it. She glanced up when I passed, and her eyes flicked toward the window overlooking the lot. I knew she was looking at my car. Then she smiled. Not kindly, not openly cruel, just enough to remind me she still thought she had the better story. I went to my desk, opened the account files, and finished the policy revisions with the same care I gave everything. Because the first rule of taking a larger step is not tripping over the small one in front of you. Around 3, my manager asked me to bring updated documents into the conference room. Sarah was there with 2 members of her dealership staff, both wearing branded polo shirts and tired expressions that did not match the glossy brochure on the table. I handed over the folder. Sarah took it without looking at me first. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, then added, "Did you manage to make it back from lunch without a tow truck?" The room gave the soft laugh people use when they want access to someone's approval. I looked at her, then at the 2 staff members, one of whom immediately found the table more interesting. "The car did fine," I said. "It usually does when maintenance is not ignored." Her smile tightened, but she let it pass, probably because she thought I was talking about brake pads and oil changes. I was not. I noticed the service manager's face then. A small flinch. Not much, but enough. People inside struggling businesses develop reactions to certain words. Maintenance. Deferred. Ignored. Cost. Sarah tapped the folder. "We are all set, then?" "For the insurance review?" "Yes," I said. "Assuming the vehicle inventory schedule you provided is current." One of her staff members shifted in his chair. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why would it not be?" I kept my voice neutral. "Aging inventory changes exposure. Units over 120 days should be classified differently if they are still floor planned." The room changed. Not dramatically, but clearly. The service manager stopped looking at the table. The other staffer looked at Sarah. Sarah stared at me as if the old sedan outside had just spoken fluent finance. "I did not realize insurance clerks were dealership consultants now," she said. I smiled faintly. "I am not a clerk. And cars are only simple to people who stop reading after the sticker price." She had no immediate answer. That silence was small, but it mattered. I left the room before she could recover, walked back to my desk, and saw another message from Frank waiting for me. "Meeting tonight. Seller requests proof of funds and acquisition structure." I opened the attachment, reviewed the address, and felt the day settle into place. The seller was not meeting at the dealership. He was meeting at a quiet law office near German Village, away from the showroom, away from Sarah, away from the flags and bright lights and monthly specials hiding the pressure underneath. At 5:15, I closed my files, logged out, and walked past the conference room as Sarah was gathering her things. She looked through the glass at me, still trying to decide whether the man she mocked that morning had somehow known more than he should. I did not give her the satisfaction of an explanation. Outside, my sedan started on the first turn of the key, rough for half a second, then steady. I drove across Columbus through evening traffic, past strip malls, gas stations, and dealership lots glowing under tall lights, all of them selling the same promise in different colors. You are what you drive. You are what you finance. You are what other people see when you pull in. I had believed that once, when I was younger and embarrassed by practical things. But now I understood something better. A paid-off car can carry a man to a meeting where he buys the place that laughed at him. When I arrived at the law office, Frank was already waiting near the entrance, gray-haired, calm, wearing a sport coat that looked older than my sedan and twice as reliable. He shook my hand and studied my face. "Last chance to decide, this is just pride talking," he said. I looked at the folder under his arm, then at the quiet office lights beyond the door. "Pride would make me want to embarrass her," I said. "This is business." Frank nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because business is colder and it lasts longer." We walked inside together, and as the receptionist led us toward the conference room, I felt no rush, no thrill, no need to prove anything loudly. Sarah could keep her jokes for one more night. By morning, the balance sheet would have a new name looking at it. The conference room at the law office was smaller than I expected, with framed city prints on beige walls, a long walnut table polished enough to reflect the overhead lights, and a quietness that made every page turn sound official. Frank Callahan sat to my left with his worn leather folder open, and across from us sat Robert Whitfield, Sarah's father, the man whose name still glowed on the dealership sign, even though his daughter had become the public face of the business. Robert looked older in person than he did in the glossy dealership ads, his gray hair combed neatly, his suit expensive but tired at the shoulders, his hands folded around a paper cup of coffee that he never drank. Beside him was his attorney, a thin man with reading glasses and a stack of documents already marked with colored tabs. Robert studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Frank says you understand dealerships." I met his eyes. "I understand overlooked costs." His mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "That is not the same thing." "No," I said, "but it is usually where the truth starts." Frank stayed silent, letting the room feel the answer. Robert leaned back, and for a second I saw the man who had probably built the dealership from a dirt lot and 6 used trucks, not the man now squeezed by floor plan interest, aging inventory, and a daughter who mistook showroom shine for operating discipline. His attorney slid the seller package across the table. "The proposal would separate the real estate from the operating entity," he said. "Mr. Whitfield is willing to consider a cash purchase of the property with a structured assumption of selected operating liabilities, but only under strict confidentiality until terms are signed." I opened the packet and read the first page without rushing. That was something my old car had taught me. Machines fail when people ignore the slow sounds. Deals do too. The property value was fair, maybe slightly high. The operating liabilities were worse than the summary Sarah's team had provided for insurance. Used inventory over 120 days was heavier than expected. Service revenue had slipped for 4 straight quarters. Warranty chargebacks were rising. The bank's patience was clearly getting expensive. I turned one page, then another, while Robert watched me like he was trying to decide whether my plain tie and modest watch belonged in the same room as his problem. "You have a loyal service staff," I said. "Your fixed operations can recover faster than sales if you stop treating the service department like a waiting room for new car buyers." Robert's eyes sharpened. "That is what I have been telling Sarah." There it was, a small crack in the family showroom. "She is focused on front-end image," I said carefully. "Luxury upgrades, bigger advertising, higher trim units. But your margin is bleeding where customers decide whether they trust you after the sale." Robert's attorney glanced at him. Frank made no expression at all, but I could feel his approval beside me. Robert tapped one finger against the table. "And you think you can fix that?" I looked down at the packet, then back at him. "I think the business can be fixed if someone is willing to disappoint the people who only love how it looks from the road." The room went quiet. Robert looked toward the window, where evening had turned the glass dark enough to reflect all of us back at the table. "My daughter will not like this." I assumed that. "She helped run that dealership for 8 years. She helped sell the image of it," I said. "That is not the same as protecting the engine." The words could have sounded cruel, but I kept them factual. I did not hate Sarah. I barely knew her beyond her polished insults and the way she treated people who did not arrive in something new. But I understood what pride could do to a business when it wore a blazer and called itself leadership. Robert looked at Frank. You told him about the bank? Frank nodded. Enough. Robert sighed then, and for the first time his face lost the dealership mask. I started Whitfield Auto with my brother and 2 mechanics. We knew every customer by name. Now I walk through my own showroom and hear people talking about social media packages while the service manager is begging for diagnostic tools that should have been replaced last year. He looked at me again. Why you? It was the question beneath all the numbers. Why the man with the faded sedan? Why the insurance office employee? Why not some polished automotive group with matching cufflinks and a corporate acquisition team? I folded my hands on the table. Because I know what it is like to keep something running after everyone else decides it is not worth respecting. Robert's eyes held mine, and I knew he understood more than I had intended to reveal. My old sedan, his old dealership, both dismissed because their surface no longer impressed people trained to worship newer paint. The attorney cleared his throat. Proof of funds. I nodded and slid the bank letter across the table. Robert read it. Then he read it again. That was the moment the room changed. People hear modest and assume small. Paper corrects them. His attorney adjusted his glasses, suddenly more attentive. Frank leaned back slightly. Robert placed the letter down with care. You have been preparing. For longer than your daughter has been laughing. The sentence escaped before I could soften it. Robert looked at me, and I expected offense. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, as if the words confirmed something he already knew about Sarah but had not wanted to name. She mocked your car, he said. It was not a question. This morning. He shook his head slowly. That girl grew up washing tires on Saturdays. I do not know when she started thinking chrome mattered more than character. I said nothing, because that grief belonged to him. The attorney began outlining possible terms. Earnest money by noon. Due diligence for 10 days. Property purchase separate from goodwill. Inventory valuation at closing. Lender consent. Employee retention plan. Confidentiality until the letter of intent was signed. I listened, asked questions, pushed back on 2 liability categories, and requested direct access to service department reports before final pricing. Robert watched all of it with a look that had shifted from skepticism to reluctant interest. By the time we stood to leave, the shape of the deal was not finished, but it was real. Robert offered his hand. His grip was firm, old-fashioned, tired. Do not turn my life's work into a revenge story, he said. I shook his hand and answered honestly. Then do not sell it to someone who only wants a trophy. Outside, the air had cooled, and the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement near my old sedan. Frank walked beside me without speaking until we reached the car. Then he looked at the cracked bumper, the dull paint, the practical tires, and gave a quiet laugh. You know, he said, that thing might be the best negotiation tool you own. I opened the door and looked back at the law office window, where Robert Whitfield's silhouette still stood behind the glass. Good, I said. Let them underestimate the car one more day. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows of the dealership, casting long shadows across the polished floors where my old sedan sat parked like a quiet observer. Sarah Whitfield paced near the entrance, her heels clicking softly against the tiles, reviewing inventory sheets with a frown that matched the tension in the air. I watched from the manager's office, the door half open, as Frank Callahan leaned casually against a filing cabinet, hands crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the room with a patient focus that made the entire scene feel like a careful chess game. The sales floor, usually filled with chatter and the subtle hum of engines, was almost silent, each employee aware that the meeting upstairs was pivotal. Sarah finally looked up and saw me, her expression a mixture of challenge and calculation, the kind of look that had led to negotiations being more about perception than numbers in the past. I stood, smoothing the creases of my shirt, and stepped into the sunlight, letting the brightness hit the folds of the leather seats around us, emphasizing the contrast between the glossy exterior and the underlying structure that required careful attention. We need to go over the balance sheet for the last quarter, I said, keeping my voice even, steady, inviting collaboration but leaving no room for underestimation. Sarah nodded, her lips pressed together briefly before replying. I have the reports here, but some figures may need adjusting after the latest inventory assessment. I glanced at Frank, who offered a subtle nod, signaling that he was ready to mediate, not dictate, a reminder that alliances could shift in moments, but strategy held. We walked over to the conference table, the large documents spread out like pieces of a map, revealing discrepancies in projected sales versus actual revenue, service income that had slipped unnoticed, and customer retention metrics that needed immediate attention. Sarah leaned forward, her hand resting on a stack of papers, eyes narrowing as she pinpointed a line item she believed justified an expense, and I countered with data collected from the last 3 months, highlighting the trend and the potential risk if the error persisted. Frank intervened occasionally, rephrasing points, guiding the conversation to ensure understanding without escalating tension, a subtle balance of authority and diplomacy. The discussion moved fluidly, each point met with thoughtful acknowledgement or a reasoned counter, the dynamic between experienced oversight and youthful ambition clear but manageable. Outside, the parking lot reflected the evening sky, the vehicles gleaming in muted tones, silent witnesses to the negotiation inside. As the session progressed, Sarah's defensive posture softened slightly, indicating receptiveness to structured guidance, while Frank's calm demeanor reinforced the importance of strategic patience. By the time the sun had dipped lower, the initial framework for adjustments, a tentative plan for correcting mismanaged funds and restructuring service priorities, was laid out. There was still much to finalize, but the first essential step, a clear understanding of the realities, responsibilities, and necessary measures, was accomplished, leaving a sense of cautious optimism that the business could recover, but only with disciplined follow-through and alignment between the perspectives of experience and ambition. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting narrow beams across the office where I stood reviewing the latest financial summaries, the crisp scent of paper and polished wood mixing with the faint aroma of coffee from the break room. Sarah Whitfield entered quietly, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension, holding a tablet displaying updated market analysis and sales projections, each number a potential turning point for the dealership. I gestured toward a chair, inviting her to sit, and she accepted, smoothing the front of her blouse with a deliberate motion, a subtle indication of the focus and seriousness she brought to every discussion. We began by examining the latest customer acquisition data, noting shifts in regional demand and highlighting areas where outreach had fallen short, discussing strategies to optimize digital marketing campaigns and improve engagement with prospective clients. Sarah pointed out a pattern in online inquiries that suggested interest in new vehicle models, and I responded by laying out a detailed plan to adjust inventory and staffing to accommodate anticipated demand, ensuring readiness without overextending resources. Frank Callahan stopped by mid-morning, leaning casually against the doorframe, his calm presence offering both reassurance and a reminder of the importance of measured decision-making, a counterbalance to the intensity of the discussions. Together, we debated the merits of different financing packages, the structure of promotional offers, and the need to align service department initiatives with sales objectives. Each point met with careful analysis and reasoned responses, emphasizing collaboration over confrontation. The conversation shifted to employee performance metrics, identifying team members excelling in customer satisfaction and highlighting areas requiring additional training or support, always focusing on constructive feedback and actionable solutions. Outside, the lot reflected the clear sky, the vehicles gleaming under the sunlight, symbolic of the potential that lay in careful planning and strategic execution. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's confidence appeared to grow as the numbers and projections aligned with our proposed adjustments, her posture more relaxed and her gestures more assured, signaling her engagement with the plan and willingness to implement changes. I summarized the key action items, ensuring clarity of responsibility and deadlines, reinforcing accountability without pressure, creating a framework for progress that was realistic and motivating. As the meeting concluded, the sense of anticipation and readiness was palpable. The dealership's path forward was no longer uncertain, but structured and actionable, a reflection of teamwork, planning, and the shared commitment to overcoming previous setbacks. Even as we dispersed, the energy in the office remained focused, a quiet determination settling in that would guide each decision and interaction in the days ahead, ensuring that every step taken was deliberate, informed, and aligned with the broader goal of sustained growth and improved performance. By late morning, the dealership buzzed with activity as Sarah Whitfield coordinated with the sales team, reviewing lead follow-ups and ensuring that every inquiry received timely attention, her expression focused and determined, reflecting a growing confidence in her ability to manage complex operations effectively. I moved between the service department and the front office, discussing scheduling adjustments to accommodate increased customer visits, each conversation emphasizing efficiency, clarity, and proactive problem-solving, avoiding any rushed decisions while maintaining a steady pace. The afternoon brought a series of client meetings, with Sarah presenting financing options and highlighting new vehicle models, her demeanor composed and professional, addressing questions with precise explanations that reassured potential buyers while demonstrating expertise. I observed the interactions, offering subtle guidance and feedback, ensuring that both customer experience and operational standards were upheld, reinforcing a culture of professionalism without micromanagement. Together, we reviewed marketing analytics, noting trends in local demand, social media engagement, and seasonal interest patterns, discussing how to align promotional strategies with current market dynamics, always focusing on actionable steps and realistic timelines. We paused briefly to assess inventory levels, checking on vehicles awaiting delivery, ensuring that the flow from shipment to showroom floor was seamless, and noting any bottlenecks that required attention, coordinating with staff to maintain consistent quality and presentation. Sarah suggested enhancements to the customer waiting area, aiming to improve comfort and overall satisfaction, and we brainstormed feasible upgrades that would have immediate positive impact without exceeding budget constraints. The afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the lot, highlighting rows of gleaming vehicles, each one a testament to careful planning, attention to detail, and the shared commitment to excellence in sales and service. As the day progressed, we evaluated employee performance metrics, recognizing those who excelled in customer service and identifying opportunities for skill development, maintaining a supportive atmosphere that encouraged growth and accountability. By early evening, the team felt a sense of achievement, knowing that strategic decisions were being implemented effectively, client interactions were handled professionally, and operational processes were running smoothly, reinforcing confidence in the dealership's direction. The quiet moments between tasks offered opportunities for reflection and planning, ensuring that each step taken was deliberate, informed, and aligned with the broader goal of sustained success, growth, and enhanced reputation. As we wrapped up the day, Sarah's energy remained high, her leadership presence evident, and I noted the subtle yet significant progress made in both customer relations and internal operations, a sign that careful planning and collaboration were producing tangible results that would guide the dealership toward a stronger, more successful future. The morning air was crisp as the dealership lot sparkled under the rising sun, Sarah Whitfield already moving with purpose, checking each vehicle's condition and verifying display setups, her expression one of quiet determination that mirrored the careful planning we had discussed the day before. I joined her in reviewing the service schedule, ensuring that appointments were confirmed and that no overlap would affect customer satisfaction, taking note of minor adjustments needed to streamline efficiency while keeping the team informed and focused. Throughout the day, clients arrived with a variety of inquiries, some looking for financing advice, others exploring trade-in options, and Sarah handled each with poised professionalism, articulating the benefits of each model while answering questions with clarity and warmth, demonstrating both knowledge and patience that reassured every visitor. I observed from the office, occasionally stepping in to clarify policies or provide additional details, always careful to reinforce a cooperative atmosphere without taking over, fostering trust and encouraging autonomous decision-making within the staff. In mid-afternoon, a small challenge arose when a delayed shipment threatened to disrupt planned sales, and together we assessed alternative strategies, reallocating resources, prioritizing customer appointments, and communicating transparently with those affected, maintaining both operational flow and client confidence. We then shifted attention to internal reviews, analyzing past sales data, examining trends in vehicle popularity, and discussing adjustments in marketing tactics to better align with seasonal demand, always emphasizing practical solutions and achievable goals. Between interactions, Sarah took the time to mentor junior staff, guiding them on effective customer engagement techniques and encouraging proactive problem-solving, reinforcing a culture of learning and accountability that elevated the team's performance. As the day progressed, we conducted a visual inspection of the showroom, ensuring that presentation, lighting, and cleanliness were optimal, noting subtle enhancements that could improve customer experience without requiring extensive renovations, and agreeing on minor adjustments that would have immediate impact. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visit from a loyal client, providing an opportunity to demonstrate personalized service and strengthen ongoing relationships. And Sarah managed the conversation with attentiveness and grace, securing satisfaction and future engagement. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the dealership had handled a steady stream of inquiries, resolved scheduling challenges, and maintained a professional, welcoming environment that reflected our shared dedication and strategic planning, leaving the team motivated and prepared for the following day, confident in the positive trajectory we had cultivated together. The letter of intent was signed at 9:30 the next morning, not in the glossy showroom where Sarah Whitfield liked to stand under perfect lighting, but in the back office of Robert Whitfield's attorney, beside a copier that hummed too loudly and a window overlooking an alley full of delivery trucks. That was how real deals often looked before they became stories people repeated later. No balloons, no applause, no polished sales pitch, just signatures, conditions, lender approvals, due diligence access, inventory valuation, and a confidentiality clause thick enough to keep Sarah from knowing the ground beneath her family dealership had already started shifting. I signed as the buyer through Mercer Holdings, a small company I had kept quiet for years, built from savings, used vehicle flips, insurance consulting fees, and the kind of disciplined living that made my old sedan possible instead of shameful. Robert signed slower than I did. His pen hovered above the page for a moment, and I could tell he was not just signing away a business structure. He was admitting that the dealership carrying his name needed someone else to protect it from the image his daughter had been selling. Due diligence starts today, his attorney said. You get access to service records, parts inventory, aged units, lender statements, employee agreements, and customer satisfaction data. Final closing depends on bank consent and clean schedules. I nodded. I want to speak with the service manager first. Robert looked surprised, then almost relieved. Most buyers ask to see the showroom. The showroom is what customers see before they trust you, I said. Service is where they decide whether to come back. Frank Callahan gave the smallest smile beside me. After the meeting, I drove to Whitfield Auto Group in the same old sedan Sarah had mocked, parking near the service entrance instead of the customer lot. The building looked different now that I had seen its numbers. The flag still snapped above the rows of cars. The glass still shined. The giant sign still carried the Whitfield name in bright blue letters. But underneath that shine, I could see the pressure. Too many trucks sitting too long, a waiting area that looked modern but tired, technicians moving with the quiet frustration of people who had asked for better tools and received motivational posters instead. The service manager, Tony Ramirez, met me near Bay 3, wiping his hands on a clean shop towel. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, with eyes that measured people faster than most sales reports could. You the consultant Robert mentioned? He asked. For now, I said. That was true enough. Tony looked past me toward my sedan. That yours? Yes. He walked around it once, taking in the faded paint, the mismatched hubcap, the careful maintenance stickers on the windshield, and the tires with good tread. Old, but kept up, he said. Better than new and neglected. I looked at him. That is exactly why I wanted to talk to you first. For the next hour, Tony walked me through the service department with a bluntness I respected immediately. 2 lifts needed repair. Diagnostic equipment was outdated. Parts ordering had been delayed to protect month-end cash. Customer complaints were not about technician quality. They were about wait times, communication, and promises made by salespeople that service could not honor. Sarah likes the front of the house, Tony said, voice low as we stood near a workbench. Events, social media, shiny delivery photos. But people do not stay loyal because you hand them keys under a ribbon. They stay loyal when you answer the phone 6 months later. I wrote that down because it was the kind of sentence that belonged in an operating plan. Around noon, Sarah walked into the service area in a white blazer and heels that did not belong near oil stains. She stopped when she saw me beside Tony with a clipboard in my hand. Confusion crossed her face first, then irritation. "Daniel," she said, "what are you doing back here?" Tony looked at me, then at her, wisely saying nothing. I kept my voice calm. "Reviewing service operations." She gave a short laugh. "For insurance?" "For due diligence." The words landed quietly, but I watched them move through her expression like a slow alarm. Due diligence for what? Before I could answer, Robert stepped through the side door from the administrative hallway. He looked at his daughter, then at me, and the exhaustion in his face told me he had hoped this moment would wait until closing. It did not. "Sarah," he said, "Daniel is reviewing the dealership as a prospective buyer." The service base seemed to lose sound. A technician at the far lift lowered his wrench. Sarah stared at her father, then at me, and the memory of her parking lot laughter stood between us as clearly as my old sedan outside. "That is not funny," she said. Robert's voice stayed quiet. "It is not meant to be." Her eyes snapped back to me. "You?" I could hear every meaning inside that one word. The old car. The insurance office. The joke at the entrance. The assumption that a man who drove something faded could not possibly have capital, patience, or leverage. I did not answer with anger. I had promised Robert this would not become a revenge story, but I also refused to make the truth smaller so Sarah could swallow it comfortably. "Yes," I said. "Me." Her face flushed. "Dad, you cannot be serious. He is not automotive." Tony cleared his throat before Robert could respond. He asked better service questions in 1 hour than most automotive buyers ask in a week. Sarah looked at Tony like he had broken formation. That was the first real crack. Not because I had money. Because someone inside the dealership had recognized competence before status. Robert stepped closer. "This business needs a buyer who understands discipline. Daniel has proof of funds, a lender path, and a plan to keep employees." Sarah shook her head. "This is because of what I said about his car." I looked at her then. "What you said about my car told me how you judge people. The dealership numbers told me how you judge business." She went still. The sentence did not need volume. It had enough weight on its own. I handed Tony the service report copy and turned back toward the bay, ending the conversation before it became personal theater. "I need the tool replacement estimates and customer complaint logs by tomorrow morning," I said. Tony nodded. Sarah stood there in the middle of the service department, surrounded by the part of the dealership she had treated like background, watching the man she mocked begin measuring the foundation beneath her family name. Outside, my old sedan sat beside the service entrance, dull paint under the afternoon sun, no longer looking like evidence of failure. It looked like a warning she had ignored. The next morning, Sarah did not come through the service entrance with the same bright confidence she had worn the day before. She arrived at 8:15 in a gray blazer, her hair pulled back, her phone in one hand and a folder in the other, walking past my old sedan without looking at it directly. That told me more than any apology could have. People do not avoid objects unless the object has started meaning something they cannot control. I was already in Tony Ramirez's office, reviewing customer complaint logs beside Frank Callahan, and the picture was clearer than I expected, though not better. Missed callbacks, delayed parts, overpromised delivery times, sales staff promising free loaners without checking availability, warranty paperwork submitted late, technicians staying after hours to protect customer relationships while the showroom celebrated monthly volume. Tony had marked the worst issues with yellow tabs, and every tab felt like a small flare from a department that had been asking to be heard. Sarah appeared in the doorway and stopped when she saw the reports spread across the desk. "Can I sit in?" she asked. Tony looked at me first. That was new too. Yesterday, this had been her family's building. Today, even before closing, authority had started moving toward the person asking the better questions. I nodded. Sarah sat across from me, back straight, face guarded. "I did not know the service complaints were this bad," she said. Tony let out a breath through his nose. "You would have if you came back here without needing a crisis." Her cheeks colored, but she did not snap back. I watched carefully. The old Sarah would have turned that comment into a performance, something about leadership priorities or brand management. This Sarah opened her folder and took out a pen. "Then show me where I missed it." Tony glanced at me again, surprised despite himself, then turned the first complaint log toward her. For the next 2 hours, we went through the dealership from the inside out. Not the gleaming front window, not the flags, not the financing banners, but the parts shelf with delayed orders, the service scheduler with double-booked appointments, the customer lounge coffee machine that had been broken for 3 weeks, and the employee break room where the chairs looked older than half the cars on the lot. Sarah followed without interrupting much. When she did speak, her questions were smaller than usual and more useful. How many calls went unanswered after 4 o'clock? Which vendors were slowest? How often did sales promise service perks without approval? Tony answered bluntly. Frank listened. I took notes. Around noon, Robert Whitfield joined us in the upstairs conference room for the due diligence review, and Sarah sat beside him, not at the head of the table. The shift was subtle, but everyone felt it. Robert looked tired, but also relieved in the way men sometimes look when they finally stop pretending a problem is temporary. His attorney reviewed the open conditions, lender consent, inventory valuation, title confirmation on the real estate, employee retention plan, and operating debt schedule. My offer had already cleared proof of funds. The next question was whether the bank would approve the assumption structure without requiring Robert to stay personally tangled in the floor plan facility after closing. They want to see your first 90-day operating plan, the attorney said. I slid a printed packet across the table. Service first. Parts control second. Aging inventory reduction third. No showroom remodel until fixed operations stabilize. Advertising cuts from image campaigns will fund diagnostic equipment and customer communication software. Sarah looked up sharply at the advertising cut. There it was, the part that hurt her pride. Those campaigns drive traffic, she said. I met her eyes. Traffic is not loyalty. Brand matters. Trust matters more. The room went still because the sentence was not just about the dealership. Sarah knew it. Robert knew it. I knew it. She looked down at the packet, jaw tight, then turned a page. The video delivery campaign can pause, she said finally. But if we cut all social spending, people will think something is wrong. I studied her for a moment. That was not a bad point. Pride had made her careless before, but pride was not the same as ignorance. We do not cut all of it, I said. We change the message. Less luxury handoff. More service transparency. Technician introductions. Real repair timelines. Customer education. Show people the part of the dealership they actually come back for. Tony leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That would help. Sarah wrote it down. Not dramatically. Not humbly enough to make a scene. Just wrote it down. And that small motion did something strange to the room. It reminded everyone that she was not useless. She had simply been aiming her talent at the wrong mirror. The meeting lasted until late afternoon. By then, the operating plan had teeth. Tony would receive tool replacement funding immediately after closing. The service scheduler would be rebuilt. Sales promises would require written service approval. Aged inventory over 120 days would be discounted or wholesaled instead of being polished and photographed into denial. Sarah would remain during the transition, but not as acting general manager. That role would be interim under Frank's oversight until closing, and after closing, I would decide the leadership structure. When Robert heard that, he looked at his daughter before he looked at me. Sarah's fingers tightened around her pen. So I have no title, she said. I kept my voice even. You have work. Her eyes lifted, and for half a second I saw the same woman who had laughed at my car because it made her feel taller. Then she looked through the conference room window toward the service base, where Tony was speaking with a technician under the hood of a family minivan. What kind of work? She asked. Customer recovery calls. Service follow-up. No scripts. No polished pitch. You call the people who felt ignored and ask what it will take to earn another chance. She swallowed. That is usually handled by junior staff. That is why it has not been handled well. The words landed, but she did not argue. Robert rubbed one hand over his face, and I could tell the day had cost him something too. Watching a stranger correct your daughter inside the business you built cannot be easy, even when the correction is deserved. After the meeting, Sarah followed me downstairs to the service entrance. My sedan was parked outside under a sky turning orange over the lot. For the first time, she stopped beside it instead of walking past. Her reflection wavered in the faded blue door. I was cruel about this car, she said. I stood a few feet away, keys in hand. Yes. She looked at the cracked trim, the clean tires, the inspection sticker, the old but cared-for interior. It is not what I thought it was. Most things are not when you only look at the surface. She nodded slowly, accepting the answer without trying to make it softer. Are you buying the dealership because of what I said? I looked at the building behind her, the service lights, the showroom glass, the employees leaving through the side door with tired shoulders and lunch coolers in their hands. I am buying it because it can be saved, I said. What you said just showed me why it needed to be. Her face changed then, not with shock this time, but with understanding she had not earned quickly. She looked at the car again. Does it really start every morning? I unlocked the door. Every morning. She almost smiled, then thought better of it. Maybe the dealership needs to learn that. I got in, turned the key, and the engine caught with its familiar rough second before settling steady. Through the windshield, I saw Sarah standing beside the service entrance, no longer laughing, no longer certain, watching an old car drive away from the dealership it might soon own. And as I pulled onto the road, I realized the reversal I wanted was no longer about seeing her embarrassed. It was about making sure the next person who walked into Whitfield Auto with worn shoes, a modest paycheck, or an old set of keys was treated like a customer, not a punchline. By the end of the following week, the bank had approved the structure, the inventory valuation had been adjusted, and the final closing date for Whitfield Auto Group was set for the next Monday morning. The dealership did not know everything yet, but it could feel the pressure shifting. Employees spoke more carefully in the hallways. Tony Ramirez moved through the service department with a little more energy, already pricing diagnostic equipment and rebuilding the appointment schedule with the focus of a man who had been waiting years for someone to take his complaints seriously. Sarah Whitfield spent 3 full days making customer recovery calls from a small desk near the service office, not the glass-walled manager's office upstairs where she used to take meetings. At first, her voice sounded polished, too polished, like she was still trying to sell people an apology instead of offer one. Tony stopped beside her desk on the second morning and said, "They do not need showroom, Sarah. They need someone who can hear why they stopped coming back." I watched from the hallway as that sentence landed. She did not like it. Her face tightened, her pen stopped moving, and for a second I thought pride would win again. Then she took a breath, crossed out the script in front of her, and dialed the next number. By Friday afternoon, she had spoken with 37 former customers, scheduled 11 service follow-ups, and personally apologized to a retired couple who had waited 3 weeks for a warranty update nobody bothered to return. When she hung up that call, she sat still for a long moment, staring at the phone. "They bought 3 cars here," she said quietly, "and we made them feel disposable." Tony looked up from a repair order. "Now you are getting it." I did not praise her. Not because the work did not matter, but because recognition too early can become another stage for performance. Sarah had spent years being rewarded for shine. I needed to see whether she could respect repair. On Saturday morning, I drove my old sedan to the dealership for the final pre-closing walkthrough. The lot was wet from overnight rain, and the faded blue hood reflected the rows of vehicles in broken patches. I parked near the front this time, not hidden by the service bay, not tucked in the back. A young salesman I had not met yet stepped outside, looked at the car, then looked at me with the careful expression people use when they are deciding how much respect someone can afford. Before he could say anything, Sarah came out behind him. She saw the moment forming and stopped it with one sentence. "Mr. Mercer is the buyer." The young man's face changed so quickly it almost hurt to watch. He straightened, apologized without saying the word, and held the door open. Sarah did not smirk. She did not enjoy his discomfort. She looked at me instead, and there was something like shame in her eyes, but also recognition. She had seen herself in that split second. We walked through the showroom together while Frank checked final paperwork with Robert upstairs. The showroom still looked impressive. Bright floors, clean windows, a row of polished trucks under hanging lights, the Whitfield logo behind the reception desk. But now the shine felt less like success and more like a question. Could the inside become worthy of the outside? Sarah stopped near a display stand with oversized delivery bows and glossy photo frames. "I used to think this was the heart of the dealership," she said. The moment people took the picture, I looked toward the service hallway, where Tony was laughing with a technician beside an open hood. "The picture is just proof they arrived. The service record is proof they came back." She nodded, absorbing it without argument. After closing, "Will my name still mean anything here?" The question was quieter than I expected. Beneath all the arrogance, there was a daughter watching her father's life's work pass into someone else's hands, and I did not want to confuse accountability with cruelty. That depends on what you make it mean, I said, not what the sign says. She looked at the showroom windows, where my sedan sat outside among vehicles worth 10 times more, but owing nothing to anyone. I thought that car meant you had failed. I know. Now I think it meant you understood something I did not. I waited. She turned back to me. Ownership without discipline is just pretending with better lighting. I almost smiled. Tony say that. No, she said. But he would probably claim it if I gave him the chance. For the first time, the silence between us did not feel like a contest. Robert came down near noon, slower than usual, holding a folder against his chest. He looked around the showroom, then at Sarah, then at me. Monday morning, he said. 9 o'clock. His voice carried the weight of a man standing at the edge of surrender and rescue at the same time. The employees will be told after signatures, I said. No announcement before that. Robert nodded. And Sarah? He asked it like a father, not a seller. Sarah answered before I could. I have work, she said. Robert looked at her, surprised by the simplicity of it. She continued, no title. Customer recovery, service follow-up, whatever Daniel and Tony assigned during transition. Robert's eyes softened, and for a second I saw the family beneath the business. He had not wanted his daughter humiliated. He had wanted her grounded. There is a difference. On Monday morning, the closing took place in the same law office where the first meeting had begun. This time, the paperwork was thicker, the coffee stronger, and the silence less uncertain. I signed the purchase documents, lender consent, real estate transfer, operating agreements, and employee retention schedule. Robert signed last. When he finished, he sat back and closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were the main dealership keys, worn smooth from years of use. Do not make it too pretty, he said. I looked at him. I planned to make it useful first. He nodded, and I knew that was the answer he needed. We drove to the dealership together, Robert in his truck, Frank in his car, me in the old sedan that had carried me through every insult, every late-night calculation, every meeting where people had to reconcile the vehicle outside with the money and plan inside. The employees gathered in the showroom after 10:30. Sarah stood near Tony, not beside Robert, not beside me, but with the staff. That was where she belonged that morning. Robert spoke first, brief and emotional, telling them the dealership was changing ownership but not abandoning its people. Then he turned to me. I stepped forward, keys in one hand, operating plan in the other, and looked at the technicians, salespeople, reception staff, porters, and managers waiting to learn what kind of man had bought the place. I am not here to punish this dealership for losing its way, I said. I am here because I believe it can become worth trusting again. My eyes moved briefly to Sarah, then to the service hallway. The first investment goes to service. The first standard is respect. And from today forward, no customer will be judged by what they drive onto this lot. The room stayed quiet for a breath. Then Tony began to clap. Others followed, not wildly, not like a celebration, but like relief finding a sound. Sarah did not clap immediately. She looked through the window at my old sedan parked by the front doors, rain drying on its hood, and then she brought her hands together slowly. Not for me alone. For the lesson, she had finally stopped resisting. And as the applause settled into the showroom, I understood that buying the dealership was not the true reversal. The true reversal was turning the place that mocked appearances into a place where appearances no longer decided a person's worth. Monday morning arrived with a quiet intensity as the dealership's lights flicked on and the first employees trickled in, coffee in hand, curious and cautious about the new management. Sarah Whitfield walked through the service bay with Tony Ramirez, cataloging the status of repairs, noting where customers had waited too long, where parts were missing, and where the team had done well despite miscommunication. Her expression was serious but reflective, and she spoke softly to Tony, outlining a plan to improve scheduling and customer communication without ever raising her voice, showing a humility she had rarely allowed herself in public. Outside, the morning sun glinted off my old sedan parked prominently in front of the showroom. The same car that had witnessed every misstep and success, now a silent marker of transition and accountability. I stood near the glass doors, watching as Sarah interacted with the technicians, listening to their suggestions, and taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Each nod and affirmation she offered seemed to encourage a sense of ownership and responsibility among the staff, establishing a new tone of collaboration rather than hierarchy. Tony moved between service bays, answering questions and offering guidance, but his eyes often flicked toward Sarah, ensuring she was asserting herself appropriately while not overstepping the relationships already in place. By mid-morning, several employees had stopped by my sedan to peek in, curious to see the car that had catalyzed this change. I remained standing quietly, letting them come to their own conclusions about the value of patience, persistence, and foresight. The phone in the front office rang repeatedly, and Sarah answered each call, using the opportunity to practice her new approach, acknowledging delays, explaining the process, and reinforcing the idea that each customer's experience was valid and important. Her confidence grew steadily with each conversation, and the tone of her voice softened from nervous professionalism to genuine engagement, signaling a transformation that no exterior signage could convey. Around noon, Robert Whitfield arrived to inspect the progress, standing briefly in the service bay and observing Sarah and Tony coordinate staff, checking schedules, and confirming repair priorities. He nodded silently, a subtle acknowledgement of the discipline and focus now present, the pride in his eyes tempered by recognition that the business was no longer merely his legacy, but a living operation requiring attention and integrity. Employees moved through the space with more energy, a sense of direction emerging from the careful balance of authority and collaboration being demonstrated by Sarah and Tony. By afternoon, the first customer arrived with a vehicle in for routine maintenance, and Sarah personally greeted them, taking time to explain the service process, introducing the technicians by name, and emphasizing that the dealership's commitment was to transparency and care, not just profit. The customer responded with genuine appreciation, visibly relaxing, a small but meaningful signal that the cultural shift was beginning to resonate. The day continued in this rhythm: service checks, customer calls, inventory reviews, and staff coaching. Each interaction reinforced the message that ownership without responsibility is hollow, and that rebuilding trust requires both attention to detail and empathy. By evening, as the last vehicles were parked and lights dimmed, Sarah paused at the front of the service bay, surveying the dealership with a thoughtful expression, understanding fully that the work of transformation was ongoing, and that the real measure of success would be in the sustained confidence of both staff and customers over time, not in a single transaction or headline. The day closed with a quiet satisfaction, the beginning of a new chapter for the dealership, where lessons of accountability, humility, and consistent effort promised a foundation stronger than any previous ownership could guarantee.